January 1941, the North Atlantic breathes like a living thing. Steel groans under pressure as U-47 slides beneath a slate-black sea. Inside the hull, air is stale. Condensation drips from valves and pipes. Red lights glow dimly over tired faces. Proof. Every man listens not for orders but for the next explosion. Then it comes. A dull thud. Another. Depth charges, measured, deliberate, walking closer. The boat shudders. Instruments flicker. Diesel fumes cling to the narrow passageways. Somewhere forward, a gauge needle trembles just past safety. The crew knows this sound. It is the sound of being hunted. At the center of the control room stands Captain Lieutenant Günther Prien. His cap is off. His eyes are fixed forward, unreadable. He has been here before, alone beneath the sea, gambling lives against minutes and meters and meters and meters. But this time, the net is tighter. The escorts above are patient, experienced, relentless. Oxygen is thinning. Batteries are draining. The sea is closing in. And in the silence between explosions, a truth settles over the boat. This moment did not begin here. It began years earlier, long before the Atlantic, before the war, before U-47 ever left harbor. By September 1939, the continent was already tense with unfinished business. The Treaty of Versailles had crippled Germany's navy after the First World War, reducing a once formidable fleet to a shadow force. Battleships were restricted, tonnage was capped, submarines were forbidden outright, at least on paper. But memory lingered. In Berlin, naval officers had not forgotten how close Germany's U-boats had come to starving Britain into submission in 1917. When war returned, Germany knew one thing with certainty. It could not challenge the Royal Navy ship for ship. The British fleet was vast, experienced, and global. It controlled choke points, sea lanes, and centuries-old maritime infrastructure. Any direct confrontation would be suicidal. So the Kriegsmarine turned back to the weapon it knew best, the submarine. At the center of this thinking stood Karl Dönitz, a former U-boat commander from the First World War. Dönitz believed submarines were not just weapons, but strategic instruments. Britain, he argued, was an island empire sustained by shipping. Coal, food, oil, steel, everything arrived by sea sink enough merchant vessels, and Britain would suffocate without ever being invaded. In 1939, Germany did not have enough submarines. Dönitz calculated that at least 300 operational U-boats would be needed to wage an effective tonnage war. At the outbreak of hostilities, Germany had fewer than 60, and only a fraction were suitable for Atlantic operations. Each boat mattered. Each patrol carried disproportionate weight. Success or failure rested not on fleets, but on individual commanders. The early months of the war were uncertain. Britain implemented convoy systems almost immediately, drawing on hard lessons from the previous conflict. Merchant ships were grouped together and protected by destroyers and corvettes equipped with sonar, still primitive but improving. The sea was no longer an open hunting ground. It was becoming a contested battlefield. Yet in late 1939 and early 1940, the balance briefly tilted. Allied anti-submarine warfare was uncoordinated, air cover was limited by range, radar was still experimental, escorts were few. In this gap, later known as the First Happy Time, German U-boats found opportunities, lone ships, poorly defended convoys, vast stretches of ocean with no protection at all. For Berlin, early victories were not just tactical, they were political. The regime needed symbols, proof that Germany could strike back against Britain despite naval inferiority, proof that the Kriegsmarine could matter in a war dominated by armies and air forces. This pressure filtered down to the U-boat arm. Crews were trained quickly. Boats were pushed hard. Patrols were extended beyond safe limits. Commanders were expected to take risks, calculated risks, but risks nonetheless. Surfacing at night to attack with deck guns, penetrating defended waters, operating close to enemy ports where detection was almost guaranteed. It was within this atmosphere of urgency, experimentation, and rising expectations that certain officers began to stand out. Not because they were reckless, but because they were precise, calm under pressure, aggressive when opportunity appeared. Trusted to operate independently for weeks at a time with no support, no resupply, and no margin for error. These men became the sharp edge of Dönitz's strategy, and among them, one name would soon rise faster and burn brighter than almost any other. Günther Prien was not yet a legend, but the war was about to give him the chance to become one. Born in January 1908 in Osterfeld, an industrial town in the Ruhr, Prien grew up amid economic instability and political collapse. Germany's defeat in the First World War had left deep scars. Inflation erased savings. Employment was uncertain. For many young men of his generation, the sea offered not adventure, but escape. Prien went to sea early. He served first in the merchant marine, learning navigation the hard way. Long routes, heavy weather, unforgiving schedules. These years shaped him more than ideology ever would. He learned patience, precision, the discipline of keeping a ship alive when nothing else mattered. By the time he entered naval service, he was already accustomed to responsibility without supervision. When Germany quietly rebuilt its navy in the 1930s, Prien transferred into the Kriegsmarine. He was not flamboyant, not political. His superiors noted something else instead: composure. Under stress, his voice did not rise. His decisions did not rush. He absorbed information, waited, and acted without unnecessary motion. Submarine service selected for exactly this temperament. Life aboard a U-boat stripped away rank and ceremony. Space was measured in inches. Privacy did not exist. Men slept beside torpedoes, ate above batteries, and breathed air recycled through chemicals that burned the throat. Authority came not from insignia, but from trust. A captain who panicked would doom everyone. A captain who hesitated could miss his only chance. Prien earned that trust quickly. So, by 1938, he was assigned command of U-47, a Type V submarine, one of the most capable boats Germany possessed at the time. Fast on the surface, maneuverable underwater, and armed with 5 torpedo tubes, it was designed for aggressive Atlantic operations. But its strengths came with limits. Its endurance was finite, its dive time was slow by later standards, and once submerged too long, it became a steel coffin. Command of U-47 was not given lightly. Prien trained his crew relentlessly. Drills were repeated until movements became instinctive. He emphasized silence, precision, and calm execution over bravado. Mistakes were corrected quietly. Praise was rare, but confidence grew. The men learned how their captain thought, how long he waited before attacking, how closely he watched convoy patterns, how he trusted periscope glimpses measured in seconds. Then came the mission that changed everything. In October 1939, Prien received orders few others would have accepted. He was to penetrate Scapa Flow, the Royal Navy's main anchorage in the Orkney Islands, a natural harbor guarded by sunken block ships, patrols, and minefields. It was considered secure, impregnable. A place where British capital ships could anchor without fear. The risks were extreme. Narrow channels, strong currents, no room to maneuver. Detection would mean certain destruction. But Dönitz believed the psychological impact of success would outweigh the danger, and he believed Prien was the man to attempt it. On the night of 13/14, October, U-47 slipped through the defenses. Public humiliation had no place in a steel tube where morale was as critical as machinery. In combat, he delegated clearly. Orders were short, unambiguous. He trusted his officers and expected the same in return. This mutual confidence allowed U-47 to act faster than many Allied escorts anticipated. But leadership also meant restraint. Prien did not attack every target. He broke off engagements when conditions turned unfavorable. He conserved torpedoes. He refused to surface recklessly when escorts were nearby. This discipline extended U-47's effectiveness and kept the crew alive longer than chance alone would allow. Still, every successful patrol increased pressure. Each return to port was shorter than the last. Expectations rose. The margin for error narrowed. And above the surface, the enemy was learning. The Type V submarine was a weapon of compromise. On the surface, U-47 could outrun many escorts. Its diesel engines gave it reach across the Atlantic. Its torpedo load allowed multiple attacks in a single patrol. But underwater, it was slow, vulnerable, blind beyond the narrow cone of its hydrophones. Diving took time, precious seconds that often decided life or death. Once submerged, battery power dictated everything. Speed drained it quickly. Silence preserved it. Commanders like Prien had to balance aggression with invisibility, knowing that every maneuver carried a cost. Early in the war, this balance favored the hunter. British sonar, ASDIC, struggled to maintain contact at speed or in rough seas. Depth charges were crude. Many exploded too shallow. Others detonated far from their targets. U-boats survived by meters and seconds, but technology does not stand still in wartime. By late 1940, Allied escorts improved coordination. Convoys grew larger. Air patrols extended their reach. New depth charge patterns were tested. Radar began detecting surface submarines at night. Once their greatest advantage, the Atlantic was becoming hostile water. The enemy angle the Royal Navy learned through loss. Every sunk merchant ship brought new analysis. Survivor reports were compared. Escort tactics adjusted. The British did not need to destroy every U-boat. They only needed to force them down, break attacks, and protect cargo long enough for industry to respond. By 1941, the Hunter had acquired patience. Escorts no longer rushed attacks. They held contact. They circled. They coordinated between ships, passing sonar bearings and timing explosions to exhaust batteries and air supplies rather than scoring immediate kills. This strategy aimed at inevitability. For commanders like Prien, it meant fewer clean escapes. Surfacing at night became dangerous. Daylight attacks were nearly suicidal. The sea lanes narrowed. The space to maneuver shrank. Every patrol became a test not just of skill, but endurance. The moral angle in Germany, Prien was celebrated as a hero. In Britain, he was regarded as a criminal. Neither image reflected the reality aboard U-47. Submarine warfare erased distance. There was no charging enemy, no flags, no exchange of fire across decks. A torpedo was fired, and minutes later, a ship was gone. Sometimes survivors were seen in the water, sometimes not. Prien followed the laws of naval warfare as they were interpreted at the time. He did not fire on lifeboats. He did not machine gun survivors. But he also did not linger. A surfaced U-boat was a vulnerable U-boat. Compassion had limits imposed by physics. This moral tension between duty and humanity was never resolved. It was endured. The strategic angle by early 1941, Prien had sunk 17 confirmed enemy ships across multiple patrols. The tonnage mattered. But more important was what it represented. The effectiveness of a single commander operating at the edge of possibility. For Dönitz, Prien was proof that the strategy worked. For the Allies, he was proof that it had to be stopped. So, the Atlantic had become a chessboard where every move was studied, every success answered. And somewhere within that widening struggle, U-47 set out once more, its commander carrying experience, reputation, and the quiet understanding that the sea does not grant unlimited victories. Lay another convoy. Above, escorts were waiting. And below, the depths offered no forgiveness. From this tension, the war moved toward its breaking point. U-47 is deep into its patrol zone, far from friendly ports, far from air cover. Winter storms have churned the sea for days, scattering convoys and masking movement, but also exhausting crews and machinery alike. Inside the boat, batteries are already below ideal charge. Fuel margins are tight. Torpedoes are no longer plentiful. Then contact is made. Hydrophones pick up propellers, multiple screws, steady rhythm, a convoy, heavily escorted. The kind of target that once promised opportunity, but now carries risk in every direction. Prien studies the data in silence. Course, speed, escort spacing. He knows the pattern. He has broken it before. U-47 surfaces under cover of darkness. Cold air rushes in. Diesels roar to life. The boat knifes forward, using speed rather than stealth. Prien intends to penetrate the screen, strike from within, and vanish before the escorts can respond. It is a tactic he has mastered. Dangerous. but decisive, 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 but decisive. At close range, torpedoes are fired. Explosions bloom against the black horizon. A merchant ship staggers, then slows. Another is hit moments later. Confusion ripples through the convoy. Signal lamps flash. Whistles sound. Escorts accelerate. The response is immediate. Searchlights rake the sea. Radar picks up a contact. A destroyer turns hard, cutting across U-47's escape path. Prien orders a crash dive. Men scramble. Valves are thrown. The deck tilts sharply as the boat plunges beneath the surface. Seconds later, the first depth charges fall. The explosions are closer than before. Plates buckle inward. Light bulbs shatter. The sound is not thunderous. It is crushing. Each detonation forces the hull inward, then releases it again, like a giant hand testing for weakness. Prien orders silence. Engines slow to a crawl. The boat settles deeper, slipping below safe operating depth. Gauges creep upward, sweat beads on foreheads despite the cold. Every man understands the arithmetic. More depth means more pressure, less margin, fewer chances. Above, the escorts do not rush. They circle, they listen, they wait. Hours stretch. Depth charges fall in patterns designed not to kill but to drain. Batteries weaken, air grows foul, carbon dioxide builds, burning lungs and eyes. Men fight the urge to cough, to move, to make noise. Prien remains still, eyes closed at times, measuring distance by instinct. He has escaped traps like this before, but something is different now. The explosions are too methodical, the intervals too deliberate. The enemy is no longer guessing, they are calculating. And with each passing minute, U-47 sinks closer to a point where choices begin to disappear. U-47 drifts in near silence, engines barely turning, the boat angled slightly downward as if pulled by the weight of the sea itself. Battery indicators slip toward critical. Oxygen candles are prepared but not lit. Using them too early would shorten the remaining hours. Full. Another pattern of depth charges erupts. This time, one detonates close enough to rupture internal fittings. A pipe bursts. Water sprays into the compartment. Thin, but relentless. Men move to contain it, hands shaking despite discipline. The hull creaks, no longer a distant sound, but a living pressure pressing inward from all sides. Prien studies the gauges. Depth beyond recommended limits. Air deteriorating. Batteries failing. Remaining options narrow to one. Stay below and the boat will suffocate quietly, inevitably. Surface and face the escorts directly, exposed and outgunned. Prien removes his cap again. The gesture is small, but final. He understands what surfacing means. A surface submarine is vulnerable to gunfire, ramming, and aircraft, but it also restores air, power, movement. It offers a chance, slim but real. He gives the order. Compressed air blasts into the ballast tanks. The boat begins to rise, slowly at first, then faster. Men brace as U-47 angles upward, breaking through layers of pressure that have held it down for hours. Above, the escorts sense it. Sonar contact changes. Bearings shift. Engines accelerate. Utzons accelerate. U-47 breaches the surface amid chaos. Night air floods the hull. Hatches fly open. Deck crew rush into freezing wind and spray. Searchlights snap on instantly, pinning the submarine in harsh white beams. Tracer fire rips across the water. Shells strike metal with brutal clarity. Prien orders return fire. The deck gun opens up. Muzzle flashes, briefly illuminating faces hardened by months at sea. It is not defiance for its own sake. It is necessity. A surfaced boat must fight or die. There is no third option. One escort veers away under fire. Another closes fast, intent on ramming. U-47 turns hard, engine screaming, trying to create space, but the odds are overwhelming. Radar has removed the darkness. Numbers favor the hunters. Damage accumulates quickly. A shell tears into the conning tower. Another strikes near the stern. Astern. Communications fail. Steering becomes erratic. Water floods compartments faster now. The boat lists. Inside, Prien remains at his station. There is no recorded final message. No dramatic last transmission. Only Allied reports of a violent surface engagement, followed by a sudden explosion and oil spreading across the waves. By dawn, the sea is calm again. U-47 is gone. No survivors are found. With her vanished Captain Lieutenant Günther Prien, age 33, along with every man aboard. The commander who once slipped unseen into Britain's most guarded harbor disappears without witnesses, without wreckage, without certainty beyond probability. The Atlantic closes over the site, indifferent to reputation or record, and the war moves on. But the absence left behind is felt immediately by both sides of the ocean. In March 1941, submarines vanish often. Radios fail, weather interferes, patrol schedules slip. Days pass before concern hardens into dread. When U-47 does not report, assumptions remain cautious. The Atlantic is vast. A delayed transmission is not unusual, but weeks go by. Other boats return. Reports are filed. Patrol zones are cleared. No message arrives from Prien. No coded acknowledgement. No sighting. Slowly, the truth becomes unavoidable. U-47 has been lost. In Germany, the reaction is restrained, carefully managed. Official communiques avoid detail. The regime understands the power of symbols, and Prien is still one of its most potent. His earlier triumphs had been broadcast relentlessly. His face had appeared in newspapers, posters, newsreels. To admit his destruction outright would puncture the myth. Privately, the shock runs deep. Karl Dönitz loses more than a commander. He loses proof. Prien had embodied the ideal U-boat officer, disciplined, aggressive, reliable. His success supported the argument that submarines could win the war at sea despite numerical inferiority. His loss, therefore, carries implications beyond a single boat. For U-boat crews, the effect is immediate and personal. Prien had been known, respected, his methods studied. His patrol reports circulated. If even he could be hunted down and destroyed, no commander was immune. Conversations quiet in pens and barracks. Confidence does not vanish, but it hardens into something colder, more realistic. On the Allied side, confirmation comes through fragments. Erhigur, escort logs note heavy engagements, sonar contacts lost after surface action, oil slicks observed, debris absent, but absence is not unusual in deep water. And with that shift complete, the story of U-47 settles into memory, awaiting reflection rather than judgment. In the early years of the Atlantic War, the ocean still allowed individuals to matter, to shape outcomes through judgment, patience, and nerve. Prien operated in that narrow window where skill could outweigh numbers and darkness could still protect the hunter. His successes were real, measurable, and devastating. 17 ships did not vanish by accident. But the sea adapts just as war does. Each patrol taught the enemy how to listen more closely, how to wait longer, how to close the net without haste. The same qualities that once made Prien effective, precision, restraint, independence, eventually faced an opponent that could absorb them and respond with methodical force. There was no grand finale, no final broadcast, no witnesses to confirm his last moments. Only calculations, reports, and an oil slick on the surface of an indifferent ocean. This absence is fitting. Submarine warfare erased ceremony. It left only outcomes. Prien did not change the war by himself. But he revealed what was possible and what was unsustainable. He showed how thin the margin was between hunter and hunted, between control and confinement. His end marked the moment when the Atlantic ceased to reward brilliance alone and began to demand systems, scale, and endurance. Today, U-47 remains unfound, somewhere beneath the Atlantic. Steel rests in darkness, untouched by myth or memory. The men aboard are not heroes or villains there. They are sailors preserved by pressure and time. And above them, the sea continues, silent, vast, and unchanged, holding the truth that every naval war eventually teaches. No one ever truly conquers the ocean.